Determine the left-sided limit and the right-sided limit and the two-sided limit as x approaches 3 pi over 2 of -1 divided by sine x plus 1. Each of these involves the limit as x approaches 3 pi over 2 of -1 divided by sine x plus 1. The first thing to do is try plugging a 3 pi over 2 in for each of the x's. That'll give a -1 over the sine of 3 pi over 2 plus 1, which is -1 over the sine of 3 pi over 2 is a -1 plus 1, which is a -1 over -1 plus 1 is a 0. That 0 in the denominator is not actually a 0 since x is only approaching 3 pi over 2. It doesn't reach 3 pi over 2. But a limit result of a non-zero number over 0 equals to either positive infinity or negative infinity, where the sign of the infinity often depends on the side that the limit is approaching from. Therefore, we have to work out each of the one-sided limits separately. We have the left-sided limit indicated by the negative superscript on 3 pi over 2. And the right-sided limit indicated by the positive superscript on the 3 pi over 2. Let's start with the left-sided limit. We want to look at what is making 0 in the denominator, which is the sine of x plus 1. As x approaches 3 pi over 2, the sine of 3 pi over 2 is a -1. Added to 1 will make a 0. This is approaching 3 pi over 2 from the left side, which is less than 3 pi over 2. On the unit circle, that'll put it in the third quadrant. The sign of something less than 3 pi over 2 will not be a -1. It will be less negative than -1. It cannot be more negative than -1 because sign never goes more negative than -1. So it can only be less negative. It'll be something like -0.99. If that were put in for the sign and added to the 1 in the denominator, it will be a positive number. The numerator is a -1. The denominator will be a positive number, but close to 0 as x approaches the 3 pi over 2. We have a negative over a positive, which is a negative, a non-zero over 0, which is an infinity, and there is the result of the left-sided limit. The right-sided limit will work out in a similar fashion. The right side of 3 pi over 2, greater than 3 pi over 2, puts it in the fourth quadrant. The sign of 3 pi over 2 is a -1. The sign of something that's close to 3 pi over 2 but greater will be, again, less negative than -1 because it can't possibly be more negative than -1. Sign never goes more negative than -1. So it'll be like -0.99. If plugged in for sine x added to 1, that will be a positive number in the denominator. The numerator is a -1. The denominator is a positive number, but it will approach to 0. A negative over a positive is a negative. A non-zero over 0 is an infinity. And there's the result of the right-sided limit. The two-sided limit depends on the results of the one-sided limits. They match each other. Therefore, the two-sided limit will also be negative infinity up there. And there is the results of the three separate limits.